hot cocoa versus drinking chocolate. They're kind of used interchangeably, and that's fine. It's no big deal, but they are different if you want to get nitpicky with it. Hot chocolate is cocoa powder. So cocoa powder is basically pressed cacao having the cocoa butter extracted and leaving behind a very low-fat solid from the cacao solids in the form of cocoa powder. So you take cocoa powder, mix it with some sugar, some spices, probably fake vanilla, whatever. Not being critical, and voila, we have the drink that we all grew up with in the form of hot chocolate. Now, hot chocolate is a very flat drink that'll be sweet, slightly bitter, but you know, it's gonna be much less of an indulgent kind of thing. And if you want to think of it in one way, you can think of drinking chocolate as the European style of chocolate. You know, drinking chocolate was chocolate for the longest time. I mean, chocolate bars have only been around for a couple hundred years. That form of eating chocolate is super new. Before it would have been people taking chocolate, whether at home or in cafes or, you know, whatever. Thank the Jesuits for some of that. Drinking chocolate is essentially what it sounds like. Chocolate that's ground up and then added to either hot water or hot milk / cream, or you know, anything you want really, as long as it's in the form of chocolate, which is drinkable. That is pretty much the definition of drinking chocolate. Super rich, way more indulgent. It's gonna have a ton more depth of flavor, and it's the way they drank chocolate in Europe for the longest time. When the conquistadors brought chocolate back to Europe, Ferdinand and Isabella at their court, their chefs prepared it in ways that they found more palatable, adding things like sugar, rice, spices, things that would have been used much more readily already in Europe and would make it far much more palatable for their, you know, not jaded, but spoiled maybe, palates. Now, fast forward a few hundred years, what are our palates like compared to them? Well, we definitely like things sweet. They did too, but we have very different ideas as far as texture and acceptability versus the world that they lived in, especially what you grew up with. You know, coffee comes to mind as another example of something. People are so comfortable with what they're used to with coffee, it can be hard to adjust your expectations for different types of coffee. And I think hot chocolate is probably one of those. I think a lot of Americans in particular find drinking chocolate a little bit too intense, and certainly taken in much smaller quantities than a big glass, you know, with marshmallows of hot chocolate. Drinking chocolate is something that's supposed to be sipped, aka why it's called sipping chocolate in some places, and taken in small quantities and indulge. You know, you drink too much of it, you get sick. I've definitely done it plenty of times. It's like eating a ton of chocolate, you know, it's got a decent amount of fat. Cacao in itself is about 50% fat, so if you start with that, you know, your chocolate, if it's 70%, you can do the math. You're adding other things like milk and cream, boosting up those things. You're gonna have something that's very much rich and should be taken slowly, and you know, can be an experience in itself to enjoy and savor. The New World chocolate tradition stretches back to 1800 BCE. The Olmec civilization were the first people that we knew of that used cacao in any way, shape, or form that we would recognize today. Wasn't a drink that the modern palate would enjoy by any stretch of the imagination. Ground cacao, spices to offset the bitterness, probably not sweetened. An acquired taste, to say the least. I would think of it like the Turkish coffee of our modern world. If any of you have had it, it's great, but it's got all the coffee grounds in it. If you hit the bottom, it's pretty intense. So old style, new world chocolate, very different. Our first homage to the New World drinking chocolate tradition is a 50-50 chocolate to water blend. Just think of this as thinning it out a little bit to make it a little more drinkable. We're gonna add our drinking chocolate. This is about a 1/4 cup of drinking chocolate to about a 1/2 cup water. go ahead and just use the best tap water you have on hand for this. You know, if you don't have good tap water, get some bottled water that doesn't suck. We're gonna put this onto a high heat, bring it to a simmer, kill the heat, add your drinking chocolate, and whisk to combine. Drinking chocolate doesn't need to be fine by any stretch of the imagination. You could even just break up a chocolate bar and do it. It just helps it dissolve a little quicker when it's in smaller pieces. Don't expect a powder with this, it's not hot cocoa. Into a very small espresso cup, I'm gonna add our first indulgent treat. There's something about smaller sized vessels like this that always make it feel a little more special, whether it's a shot of espresso or a doll's tea party. Good times. There's something really nice and clean about the New World water method. You know, there isn't a whole lot competing with it. Certainly one of the lightest ways to drink. I mean, it's almost like cutting whiskey with, you know, water or whatever. You're cutting the chocolate with water, kind of lightening it up. Less indulgent, more palatable. Still really enjoys a nice flavor profile though. This is the Honduras Swamp Usurpi, nice earthy flavored chocolate. Great for drinking. Now, one of the things they really liked doing with New World chocolate was pouring it from a height over and over and over again. There's a great account from a conquistador who saw them doing this, and it was to make the foam. They loved foam on top of their chocolate. Now, I wouldn't recommend pouring something over and over again from a great height because it's just going to splatter everywhere, you know, without even trying it. I can imagine how it's gonna go. However, in the modern world, things like spice grinders and blenders, depending on what you're using, can create this effect quite nicely. And it is a fun way to consume your chocolate. So this one, I thought add a little bit of chipotle chili powder, some salt, which I normally like to add anyways, and we'll get a little closer to a modern palatable version of a New World chocolate. Chocolate spice and everything nice, along with a little salt to really lift it up. Gonna add some water, same ratio as before. We're just doing in this one a pinch of chipotle and a pinch of salt to taste. Get your water and chocolate measured up, simmer it, kill the heat, add your pinches of each of your additions, whisk it up until it's nice and smooth, and put it in a blender to foam it up. This isn't going to get as much of a head as a super light aerated texture. Grab the glass you've been polishing for the last 10 minutes and pour it in and enjoy its nice soft lightness. Kind of like the microfoam you get when steaming milk, I think. It's really nice. For a drinking chocolate, really light. You know, normally it's a thicker thing that really coats your throat. This one almost, with the water helps of course, but blender, chipotle, a little bit of salt, elevated, unique, New World style drinking chocolate. Yeah, that's fun. Back to the old world we go. Instead of water, we're gonna do some whole milk for this one. Same ratio, 1:2. Measure up your milk, get it steaming, and while it's doing that, measure up your chocolate, doing 50%. Once it starts to bubble away, kill it from the heat, add your chocolate, and whisk away. It can take a couple minutes to get it smoothed out, but it's worth the effort, and it's pretty to do in the meantime. Get it into a nice cup and appreciate. Soon as dairy starts getting added, that richness level just goes up a few notches. You know, this is a whole milk, old world idea, and still on the clean side. Still, it's just like, it's indulgent, but it's not getting into like a incredible dessert realm. Very drinkable. This is the one I tend to make when I'm having drinking chocolate at home. 50-50 mix of cream and whole milk, a little bit of salt added, half that amount of drinking chocolate, so the ratio is similar, but you're upping that indulgent level by a significant margin. Get it heated up, whisked up just like before, The level of intensity is almost like a high when you're having this. This one is essentially drinking chocolate for royalty. 50% cream, 50% whole milk, pinch of salt, and then half chocolate to liquid ratio brings about a drinking chocolate that, in my mind, is pretty much the apex of the entire experience that is drinking chocolate. Now, I might be a little jaded. I tend to like extremes, so, you know, take that with a grain of salt, but very good. Woo! It's the best one, but I like extremes, and I might be a little, you know,